HBO's House of the Dragon takes us to the mythical land of Westeros, set approximately 200 years before the events of Game of Thrones and George R.R. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire collection of novels. In 2018, Martin released his fantasy book Fire and Blood, a chronological history of one of Westeros' most influential families or houses, House Targaryen, House of the Dragon. A house within Westeros with the exclusive control of fire-breathing dragons. Whilst Fire and Blood's tale begins with Aegon Targaryen, Aegon the Conqueror's conquest and unification of much of Westeros into a unified realm known as the Seven Kingdoms, House of the Dragon begins its focus on that realm's fifth monarch and king, Viserys Targaryen, and the conflicts that emerge within his family and those closest to them as they navigate the politics of the crown and the Iron Throne, the seat of Westerosi power. Perhaps one of the greatest draws of fantasy television comes from seeing great battles, kings and queens, prophecies and dragons, and House of the Dragon certainly has its share, with a dragon or two to spare. However, beyond the grand spectacle of fire-breathing dragons and exquisite visual effects, House of the Dragon's most profound moments of drama and intrigue stem from the politics that infuses itself throughout the show's duration. The greatest rivalries of the show expose themselves far from the grounded battlefield of war or clashes of dragons in the sky. House of the Dragon's themes of power, ambition, family and legacy are wrapped in the politics of the Seven Kingdoms, and only with an appreciation of that realm's political context can one truly view House of the Dragon in all its intended glory. With that in mind, let us explore the politics of House of the Dragon. My name is Michael Gallagher.
Fire and blood, fire and blood, fire and blood.
It is important at the outset to consider just exactly what the constitutional order is that the Targaryen dynasty lays claim to. What is the realm, the Seven Kingdoms? Who leads it? How is it governed? This we shall now consider. Let us first begin by defining precisely what we mean by the Seven Kingdoms. Now, the Seven Kingdoms is the political realm or territory that was established after Aegon Targaryen, first of his name, conquered and unified a large swathe of territory across Westeros during a war known as Aegon's Conquest. Incidentally, Aegon's Conquest would be used by historians in Westeros to act as the epicentre of the calendar. For example, House of the Dragon begins in the year 112 AC roughly. Now that means 112 years after Aegon's Conquest. Anything prior to Aegon's Conquest is considered BC, before Conquest. Prior to Aegon's Conquest, the vast majority of territory across Westeros was split between 7 independent kingdoms. Aegon effectively unified 6 of those kingdoms and combined them into one realm. Those kingdoms were the Kingdom of the North, the Kingdom of the Mountain and the Vale, the Kingdom of the Reach, the Kingdom of the Stormlands, the Kingdom of the Isles and the Rivers, and the Kingdom of the Rock and the Westerlands. You will note that I said Aegon united 6 kingdoms. Now the missing 7th kingdom is considered to be Dorne. Aegon the Conqueror never actually managed to unite Dorne with the rest of the realm, and instead he signed a peace treaty with his new realm acting as one party, and with Dorne acting as that separate party but remaining an independent kingdom.
Was Dorne invaded?
Whilst only conquering and unifying what were effectively 6 kingdoms, the political state that Aegon established came to be known as the Seven Kingdoms. This may be perhaps because Aegon wished to eventually bring Dawn into the fold, and he believed that he had a claim over that territory. It might have been just a projection of strength for the land as a whole. Or maybe he wanted the world to know that despite Dawn being politically independent, it would now have to frame its future in a world of Aegon's realm. In either case, Dawn eventually does formally come into the Seven Kingdoms. However, that takes place about 200 years after Aegon's conquest and before the events of House of the Dragon. Furthermore, whilst the Seven in the Seven Kingdoms refers to the 6 largest swathes of territory, those 6 former kingdoms of Westeros, plus Dorne, in actual fact, the Seven Kingdoms includes more than 6 or 7 regions. For instance, there is the region of the Crown Lands in the area that surrounds King's Landing, and that is overseen directly by the Crown. Now that land actually takes up pieces of territory from the former Kingdom of the Isles and Rivers and Kingdom of the Stonelands. Indeed, Dragonstone, the ancient ancestral home of House Targaryen, is not considered part of the kingdoms that existed before Aegon's conquest in Westeros. Let us now consider the model of governance that the Seven Kingdoms uses. The Seven Kingdoms is an absolute monarchy that uses hereditary succession for the next in line to the throne. The monarchy is absolute in that, at least in theory, the king holds absolute power and he has the ultimate and final jurisdiction over all matters of state.
The gods have yet to make a man who lacks the patience for absolute power, Your Grace.
Now, I say in theory the king's power is absolute, because as you will see throughout the show's duration, there are varying forms of limits on that absolute power.
It isn't that simple.
Theoretically, the king and the crown should expect the realm to accept, and all lords within it to accept unquestioningly, any proclamation that the king and crown makes. However, in reality, the ability to enforce such rule is filled with challenge and nuance. In terms of the transition of power between the reigning monarch and his successor, the Seven Kingdoms utilises a form of hereditary succession, whereby when the reigning monarch dies, his title is passed to another member of the ruling house, the House of the Dragon. At the beginning of House of the Dragon, the primary model of hereditary succession which is used across most of the land of the Seven Kingdoms and with most of the houses is that of primogeniture, whereby a father's titles, lands and holdings passes on to his eldest son upon his death, even if he had daughters that were older than the eldest son. The only way in such a system for a female to inherit the titles, lands and holdings of her father would be if she were the eldest female in an only female set of children. Incidentally, across the Seven Kingdoms, those entitled to receive succession rights only include true-born children, i.e. those children born within a legitimate marriage. It also should be noted that across the Seven Kingdoms, in terms of hereditary succession, it is generally accepted that once an heir has been identified, then the line of succession is reset and restarted. So how does this work? Let me explain. Should a lord of a house have 2 sons, the eldest is identified as the heir. Now, should the heir then have his own son, yet die before he inherits the lordship of his father, the second son of the lord would not become the heir. In fact, it would be accepted that the son of the presumed heir at the time would become the new heir, given that a new succession of chain of heirs has begun. However, whilst the succession practice of primogeniture is accepted commonly across the Seven Kingdoms, at the beginning of House of the Dragon, the Crown uses a modified version of primogeniture, which in fact puts all female heirs behind all possible male heirs. In this system, if a king were to have only daughters but had a younger brother, then his younger brother would be the presumed heir.
I'm your heir.
This is why in House of the Dragon that the king's younger brother, Daemon Targaryen, is considered the presumed heir to the Iron Throne, despite the fact that Viserys, the king, does have one child in that of his daughter, Rhaenyra Targaryen. This precedent was cemented when King Jaehaerys Targaryen, first of his name, the fourth reigning monarch of the Seven Kingdoms, decided to side with the Grand Council of 101 AC, a body he set up to determine his heir, in naming Viserys Targaryen, his grandson, his heir. Viserys was selected as heir to the Iron Throne, despite the fact that his father had an older brother who also had a living child, in the form of another of Jaehaerys' grandchildren, Rhaenys Targaryen, a woman. The Grand Council voted overwhelmingly to support Viserys' claim to the Iron Throne. It is important to note, however, that George R.R. Martin himself has said that the laws of inheritance in the Seven Kingdoms are modelled on those in real medieval history, which is to say they were vague, uncodified, subject to varying interpretations, and often contradictory.
That is only by tradition and precedent.
I have decided to name a new heir.
What's more, not long after the show's beginning, Viserys breaks the precedent that secured his own claim to the throne by naming his daughter, Rhaenyra Targaryen, as heir.
Rhaenyra Targaryen, Princess of Dragonstone, and heir to the Iron Throne.
It must be said, however, that at the beginning of House of the Dragon, the precedent of royal succession in the Targaryen dynasty is far from cemented. After all, Viserys is only the fifth king of the Seven Kingdoms, and the successions before him were certainly not cut and dry. Therefore, it is no surprise that the question of succession remains one of the major thrusts of conflict throughout House of the Dragon's first season. Let's return again to the form of governance utilised in the Seven Kingdoms. Now, whilst the Seven Kingdoms is a unitary state, a singular realm, it does utilise a form of feudalism to maintain governance. Its form of feudalism exists whereby greater lords rule in the king's name in their respective regions, with the governance of that region further maintained with the help of lesser lords. Ultimately, a form of feudalism is really the only practical way any king could effectively govern the Seven Kingdoms. He requires the delegation of the powers because of the vastness and size of the realm. The Seven Kingdoms has regions that cover vast swathes of territory over many types of terrain. And if you think that the fastest means of transport for the ordinary man, outside the use of dragons, are horses that can take individuals months upon months to actually cross the Seven Kingdoms, you realise how ineffectual or impractical it would be to have a full system of civil servants across the entirety of the realm. When one event happens someplace, it could take days before the information is passed to the crown. Not to mention the colossal cost such an infrastructure would require. Indeed, Aegon Targaryen, following his conquest of much of Westeros, effectively left intact the dynasties of the previous individual monarchies and just repurposed them into house lordships, where hereditary lines were maintained so long as they accepted the new one true king. Perhaps awe or fear of dragons brought those once independent kingdoms into the fold, particularly since, essentially, they could pretty much keep things as they were, just not as a kingdom. Indeed, after Aegon's conquest, the most senior and powerful lords in the realm were considered to be the Lords Paramount. A Lord Paramount will govern his particular region, and all the houses within his region will have a lord known as a Lord Vassal. Therefore, whilst a form of centralised government does exist with the king at the helm, operating in King's Landing, legislating and decreeing on matters that affect the entire realm, In reality, the day-to-day governance of the realm is maintained by the Lords Paramount, who can essentially govern as they see fit, although of course they would be expected to enforce any decree that came from the capital. One could argue therefore that the Seven Kingdoms actually has a form of federal structure in place, although it is very loosely put together, and in fact any kingdom-wide decrees can only really be enforced with the acceptance of local and regional lords. Why should the lords bother to even listen to the crown? Well, this may be for a collective of reasons depending on the individual head of each house. Perhaps they feel a sense of honour and are duty bound after decreeing loyalty to the crown.
There has never lived a Stark who forgot an oath, and with House Stark, the North will follow.
Perhaps there is a genuine belief that a strong, united realm with common laws and customs could be useful. Perhaps also they are respectful of the realm which secured essentially a steady peace across Westeros. Before Aegon's conquest, many of the individual kingdoms were regularly combating each other in physical battle. Or there is of course the fear of what will happen if they didn't adhere to the crown's laws, perhaps reprisal from dragons or other actions from the crown. If we consider kingdom-wide or seven kingdom-wide governance, the seat of ultimate political power is the capital at King's Landing, where the Iron Throne rests, with of course the king and the monarch acting as head of state and head of government. Now the king, although is the ultimate arbiter of all matters of state and governance, he does not act alone and does not govern alone. In fact, he works collectively through an institution known as the Small Council. The Small Council is a small membership body with individuals within granted certain powers and duties to carry out on behalf of the king. Furthermore, it also acts as a direct advisory body to the king, and members can discuss and provide their opinion on all matters of state, even those that do not fall within their particular remit granted to them within the Small Council. The head of the Small Council is, by no surprise, the king, the monarch of the Seven Kingdoms. And of course this makes perfect sense given the primary, or one of the primary purposes of the council is to advise the king on matters of state. Now, whilst the king is in a collective as part of the council, only the king can enact council decisions into law.
A seat at the king's table does not make you his equal.
Furthermore, it is only the king, traditionally, who can select members of that small council. However, should the reigning monarch be below the age of legal majority, which within the Seven Kingdoms is 16 years of age, then the monarch's regent can also appoint individual members to the council. Now, a regent is a position which exists essentially to head the governance of the realm until the king reaches that legal age of majority. Traditionally, this can be a parent or another member of the monarch's family. However, this is not essential. So, of course, in said circumstances, a regent would act as the head of the council when the king chooses not to attend, and of course govern the realm, theoretically, in the king's stead. Throughout House of the Dragon's first season, the head of the Small Council is the reigning monarch, Viserys Targaryen, who is or has been considered historically a king who has been particularly influenced by those around him. Indeed, in Fire and Blood, we learn that Viserys was not the strongest-willed of kings. Always amiable and anxious to please, he relied greatly on the counsel of men around him and did as they bade more often than not.
I agree.
I would agree.
So we can see that the Small Council, at least in Fire and Blood's recollection, was particularly influential under Viserys' reign. Additionally, if the king is unable to attend council for whatever reason, the Queen can act as head of the council in his stead, which we see in House of the Dragon's later episodes, with Alicent acting as that council head. Of course, also must be highlighted that should the king permit it, the Queen can also attend council in her own stead and offer her own advice and opinions on the realm's affairs. Additionally, another individual who can hold the title of head of the council is the Hand of the King, another small council position we'll consider later. In terms of powers the king has, as we have already discussed, in theory the king has absolute power and can create legislation and decree on all matters of governance. This extends from taxation to criminal punishment to laws around marriage, the declaration of war, and even through to the enforcement of religious tenets, although of course that is often done in tandem with the head of the Faith of the Seven, the majority religion within the Seven Kingdoms. Whilst a reigning monarch may indeed feel bound by past law and precedent of prior kings, there is of course nothing from preventing them from institutionalising radical reforms to laws and customs. As with any political leader, however, the king needs to determine if he has the political capital and ability to actually enforce the laws that he legislates on, which is ever more difficult the further out from King's Landing those laws are intended to be enforced. Whilst within King's Landing itself there is an armed soldier unit called the City Watch, commonly nicknamed the Gold Cloaks, who have the responsibility for enforcing law and order within the capital, there exists no similar realm-wide enforcers of law and justice. The duty of enforcing the laws across the regions of the Seven Kingdoms falls to the great lords of the Seven Kingdoms, the Lords Paramount, who are duty-bound to ensure that the king's laws are enforced in their territories. Whilst in extreme circumstances any royal decree refused by a particular Lord of the Seven Kingdoms could be responded to with the fire and blood brought by dragons, the Crown is unlikely to send forth dragons to deal with small tax discrepancies. Even if a wrongdoing or breach of law was considered in one of the regions, someone would have to find out, someone who can write, then send a raven, send that to King's Landing, which may take a couple of days, and then have to reach the small council. Quite an extensive array of tasks to actually even report any wrongdoing. Furthermore, the act of unleashing the wrath of dragons upon any part of the realm may indeed be considered an affront to peace and stability by lord and peasants alike. Hi there, thank you for watching this video on the politics of House of the Dragon. This project has grown quite significantly since I started working on it, and therefore I've decided to expand it into a video series. So this was the first part, and the next part will be looking at the seats on the small council, the positions in government, as well as observing the defence of the realm and the economy of the Seven Kingdoms. So if you've enjoyed this video, please subscribe to my channel and sign up for alerts. That way you can know when the next video has been released, as well as updates on any other projects I place on the channel. Please follow me on my social media accounts, the links to which are below, and also comment on the video to let me know what you thought. And of course, please support the official releases of George R.R. Martin at HBO's House of the Dragon, Fire and Blood, and all the rest from the world of Ice and Fire. Until next time, I'm Michael Gallagher.